Drink whiskey blind. Maybe not at a party. Or unless you're surrounded by friends. Well, all of a sudden this became a PSA. Okay, so when you know your environment and you're surrounded by those who love you, maybe your own home and your own whiskey stash, drink whiskey blind. Now here's what I mean. We, as human beings, our brains are comparison machines. They're pattern recognition. And when you have a machine that is a pattern recognition machine, when you experience something, it doesn't do standalone analysis. It takes this sensory input and then compares it to previous historical experiences, right? And it also uses context clues to help categorize information, right? So if you see a person running at you with a knife, context matters. Is it in an alley? Is it on a TV? Those are very different reactions all of a sudden, right? And when you are talking about whiskey or food or wine or anything like that, you're talking about a sensory experience, and sensory experiences are inherently subjective. And what your brain does is reach instantly for any possible context clues to know what to do with this information. So, there have been multiple studies that have shown that you cannot separate yourself from context. So there was a study done. If you ask me, I'll post it in the comments. But there was a study done where they tested people's experience with whether they've enjoyed a whiskey or they valued a whiskey, and everybody rated this one, or wine, this isn't wine, everybody rated this one wine higher when they thought it was more expensive. If they were told this wine is really expensive and really fancy, they rated it higher than the same wine. They were poured the same wine with no context clues because they were told it was supposed to be expensive, and so they experienced a whole different experience. There was another study done where they actually scanned people's brain waves, the pleasure center of the brain, and they found that when people were told that people were told that a wine was more expensive, they physically enjoyed it more. The pleasure centers of the brain activated more when they thought they were supposed to enjoy it more, even though that wine had been objectively altered to make it taste worse with acid. They had added tartaric acid to make it taste worse. But when they were told it was expensive and fancy, they experienced it differently. That is how flawed we are in our brains. And so you don't actually understand a whiskey that you are drinking until you've tried it completely blind with no expectation and no knowledge of what you're drinking. It's one of the only ways to fairly judge a whiskey. It's really hard to do alone, but I'll give you a few tips on how to handle this. But if you are a whiskey lover, you should be practicing blind whiskey tastings all the time. First, let's talk Mellow Corn. Mellow Corn, I had to review because this is I think, the single most underrated budget whiskey that exists in North America. It's a under $20 bottle of whiskey. It is bottled in bond, which means 4 years old, 100 proof, single distiller, single season. It's really high. This is a 90% corn, 10% rye and malted barley mix. And corn whiskey, as a category, is required to be aged only in used oak or uncharred oak, right? Now, typically, big producers are using used barrels because what happens is the big producers like Heaven Hill, who owns Mellow Corn, they empty a crap ton of bourbon barrels. They have all these empty barrels. They can't use it to make more bourbon. What do? Hey, those are the perfect barrels to end up making Mellow Corn. There you go. Mellow Corn has been produced for freaking ever. It's one of the longer produced spirits continuously running in North America. And Because no one knows corn whiskey and the consumer market generally undervalues corn whiskey, you get a 4-year-old bottled in bond, really well-produced, high-quality product for like 18 bucks a bottle. And in blind tastings, every time I've ever done one, and I've put Mellow corn in the mix, it just performs astoundingly high. It's crazy. The very first year we had the whiskey school, and we did level 2, which was 2016, I put Mellow corn in a blind tasting. It won across multiple fancy, famous bourbons. Don't underrate Mellow corn. Now, is it simple? Yes. The nose, a little earthy, a little straw, a little barnyardy, a little grain, sweet corn, like Mexican street corn, sweet corn, where it's not actually sweet corn, it's that corn with the cream sauce and the salt and pepper on it. A little dry, slightly astringent, but not too much. On the palate, corn. Soft, sweet corn, as in corn syrup corn, as in corn syrup, like Miss Buttersworth's corn syrup on pancakes corn. Sweet, approachable, pretty. I've never added water to Mellow corn, so we're going to do that. I'm a fan of Mellow corn because it's such an easy, no-brainer, simple, under 20 bucks. They haven't even changed. Look at that. It even looks like an under $20 bottle of whiskey. And I hope that never changes. I hope no one ever gets a hold of this brand and decides to redo the image of Mellow corn. That would be a tragedy. Okay, so at Wizard Academy, I don't do it as much anymore because there was an era when Emma worked on campus and when Zach Smith was the vice chancellor, where there were a whole bunch of somms and we were all nerdy about whiskey. And we used to, on a very regular basis, blind taste every week. Blind taste each other, which means we'd meet up in the vault and everybody would close their eyes. Someone would go around and pour a whiskey and everybody else would have to try to guess what they were drinking out of a room of 3,000 bottles. It was so much fun. We learned so much about our preferences and I learned how frail I am. Man, there was a whiskey level 2 where one time I spent like 2 minutes raving about the tasting notes on this whiskey only to discover that it was a Canadian Club. And the whole time the somms in the back who were pouring were just cracking up. And I still chalk it up to the fact that we had had several other things and they were lingering in my, whatever, it's an excuse. I raved about Canadian Club for like a minute and a half. And then I heard what it was and I was like, no, that can't be right. Now, here's a basic habit. If you're married or you have a girlfriend or you have roommates and they're with you, every night that's feasible, you should come home and have them pour you something that you don't know what it is from your collection. Now, the benefit is, 1, that you're going in blind, but 2, you know what you own. And that sort of limits your experience. So you should be able to pick this up and then work your way deductively through what you're smelling, think of what you own, and narrow it down to what you're drinking. Now, for some of the people watching this video, that might be a very large collection. Our type of people tend to not be the people who have 2 whiskeys at the bar. We tend to have 3-digit plus whiskeys at the bar. That might be harder than it sounds. You can also do this if you live alone. Here's what I did for a while. At the time, I would take about 20 whiskeys at a time. I would pour them into 50 ml blind, empty, unlabeled bottles with a number, a sticker, 1 through 20. And I would label it on a spreadsheet, 1 through 20, so I knew what was in every bottle. And then I would put those away. I would wait a full month, sometimes longer, if I thought I could remember, until I couldn't remember which 20 whiskeys from my collection were in those 50 ml bottles. And then at that point, I would start pulling a bottle at random and doing blind assessment on it. And then once I thought I had a handle on it, I would go back to the spreadsheet and I would look and see what that whiskey actually was. And man, I was right maybe 60% of the time. And that's only because I know my own collection. Blind tasting is really hard. I always got product, well, not always, I almost always got category, grain base, country. But when it came down to naming the actual distillery, that's when I often went off the rails. But that's a very easy way to test yourself and help you understand what you're drinking, and to remind yourself that there's more to whiskey than just like a cool bottle, cool label, I know it's fancy, let's drink it. Yeah, if you want to be a real nerd about this stuff. First, let's check and see what the water did. On the nose, it got more straw, and it got a little more vanilla. It's very weird. Almost candy corn, probably because psychosomatic, that's what's in my head. The palate's better. The palate with a little water has this balanced sort of tannicness to it with a real nice sweet sugar coating. Man, just highly underrated whiskey. So, do blind tastings. I hope that helps. And I'm really glad you're here. Cheers to you. They call me Mellow Yellow. If you're mellow and corny, then like and subscribe to this channel because you found your people.